Al Capone's name might be synonymous with Prohibition-era Chicago, but his dominance wasn't absolute throughout the 1920s. The north side of the city remained a stronghold for another formidable gangster, George Bugs Moran. Moran, the feared leader of the bloodthirsty Northsiders, refused to bend the knee to Capone like the rest of the criminal factions in the Windy City, which ignited a bitter turf war that would define the era and spill more blood on Chicago's streets than ever before. Bugs and Capone's stories run somewhat parallel despite their resentful differences. Both men built their empires on bootlegging, exploiting the lucrative opportunities created by Prohibition. They both also rose to the top of their outfits through loyalty, fear, and a lack of regard for human life, and they both hated each other with a passion. However, their rivalry went beyond mere competition for profits. Moran, raised Catholic, held a deep disgust for Capone's involvement in prostitution, a line he refused to cross despite the potential financial gains. This moral stance, combined with their clashing personalities and ambitions, fueled a conflict that would escalate to unimaginable levels of violence. The pinnacle of this is the St. Valentine's Day Massacre of 1929, which still stands as a chilling testament to the brutality of the gang war between Capone and Moran. 7 members of the Northsiders were brutally murdered in a garage by Capone men posing as police officers raiding the gang's premises, with Bugs being the intended target. This act of violence shocked the nation and solidified Capone's reputation as a ruthless and powerful figure, with the St. Valentine's Day Massacre still remembered today. But who was Bugs Moran, the man who dared to challenge Capone's omnipotent reign over Chicago? While his name might not be as widely recognised as Capone's, Bugs played a crucial role in shaping the history of organised crime in the Windy City. His story is one of ambition, defiance, and brutal violence. It is a tale of a man who rose from humble beginnings to become a powerful figure in the American underworld and became the complete epitome of a mobster from the Prohibition era. Bugs, though not a native Chicagoan, became a permanent part of the city's fabric during the turbulent 1920s. His story is a testament to the era's contradictions, a time where the lines between hero and villain were blurred and ambition often led to a life of crime. His charisma, however, was undeniable. He possessed a quick wit, a sharp tongue, and a volatile temper that made him both feared and admired. His refusal to bow to Capone's pressure earned him the respect of many who saw him as the underdog, the David to Capone's Goliath, and his defiance resonated with all those who felt oppressed by Capone's Southside crew, later to be known as the Chicago Outfit. Even Bugs's acts of violence were imbued with a certain panache. In an era that glamorized the outlaw, Moran's gunfights were seen as daring exploits rather than brutal crimes. He was a master of self-promotion, ensuring that his every move was chronicled in the newspapers, further cementing his legend. The press, eager for sensational stories, played a crucial role in shaping Bugs's public image, transforming him into a larger-than-life figure. However, beneath the bravado, Moran was a complex and contradictory figure. He could be charming and witty one moment, but think nothing of putting a bullet in an enemy's brain the next. He was a skilled manipulator, capable of adapting his persona to suit the situation. Throughout his life, Bugs's true identity remained shrouded in secrecy. He adopted numerous aliases, and his origins were a subject of much speculation. It was only years later that his carefully constructed facade was peeled away, revealing a man who had meticulously crafted a persona to fit the times. The revelation of his true name, Adelard Leo Cunin, added another layer of mystery to his already enigmatic and cryptic character. This is the story of how a Minnesota farm boy who was born with the devil inside him embarked on a meteoric rise through Chicago's underworld by commanding loyalty from his peers and not hesitating to spill blood in the Windy City during a time where more gangland slayings occurred each day than ever before in the history of America. A man who lived a life of crime spanning over 50 years, and one so interesting, I've had to divide his story into two parts. This is part one in the story of George Bugs Moran. Bugs was born Adelard Cunin in St. Paul, Minnesota on August 21st, 1893, the first child of French immigrants Jules and Marie Cunin. St. Paul saw a large influx of French immigrants in the late 19th century due to a combination of factors primarily stemming from the Quebec diaspora. Overpopulation and limited resources in Quebec led many French Canadians to seek economic opportunities in the burgeoning industrial sector of Minnesota's proximity, and existing French Canadian communities, particularly in St. Paul, further encouraged this migration, and the young couple decided that this would be the best place to start their family. Jules, hailing originally from Alsace-Lorraine in France and a skilled mason, instilled a strict old-world discipline into his son. His mother, Marie, from Chicoutimi, Quebec, Canada, offered a loving counterpoint, with her deep religious faith resonating with young Adelard. Jules began to teach Adelard about hard work and discipline in his early years, and tasked Adelard with daily duties on the family's farm, which he initially embraced. However, as he approached 10 years of age, Adelard longed for something more and began getting into trouble. He began stealing from neighbouring farms and selling the spoils on the streets of St. Paul. Noticing that his son was rebelling at such a young age, Jules decided to take action. Adelard was sent to Creighton High School, a private Catholic school in St. Paul, which Jules and Marie hoped would straighten him out. However, school proved no haven for Adelard and failed to provide a cure from his demons. The rigid structure of the Catholic institution grated against his disobedient nature. "Maudit frères," he was heard to exclaim in French, "cursed brothers," he shouted through the corridors, and strongly rebelled against the school's routine and regulations, and thus was kicked out when he was just 13. The streets of St. Paul beckoned, and he found camaraderie in a local juvenile gang who were currently terrorising the local area. 3 months after he was expelled from Creighton High School, Jules gave Adelard an ultimatum: swap the street corners for real work, or he'll be kicked out of the family home and they'll turn their backs on him. Not wanting to be cut off, Adelard took a job with the Stern Tailor and Company, remaining at home but increasingly clashing against his father's authority. Adelard also didn't stop the street corner work either. He just tended to it nocturnally now he had a day job. The gang continued their petty theft endeavours, which led to a series of run-ins with the police before Adelard was caught red-handed robbing a store in the centre of St. Paul, a serious crime, and therefore he was sent to the State Juvenile Correctional Facility, serving 9 months. This was to be the first of 3 stints in jail before he turned 17. Jules, his father, had an explosive temper, something Adelard had inherited, and after learning of his son's upcoming 3rd stint in jail, Jules lost it and turned his back on Adelard, telling him to forget about his family after a vicious fight between the two. Upon his release from prison, it was now clear that St. Paul was no longer big enough to contain Adelard's criminal ambitions or his demons. The law of Chicago, with its flourishing underworld and countless opportunities for a fresh start, proved irresistible. After the final bust-up with his father, deciding to flee his troubled past, young Adelard Cunin, soon to be known as George Bugs Moran, a name which would grace the front pages of the local newspapers on a near daily basis, fled St. Paul and arrived on a train in Chicago in 1911, aged 18. With not much cash to his name and needing a cheap place to live, Adelard found lodgings in the Irish neighbourhood of Kilgubbin, a dense network of streets just a short trolley ride from the bustling downtown loop. Kilgubbin was a world away from the farm life of St. Paul. It was a roar of markets, billiard halls, saloons and dance joints where Adelard spent most of his days and nights. He learned early on that honest labour, like his father's masonry skills and farm work, didn't always guarantee a full stomach, plus he didn't have the passion or interest to live an honest, boring life as he saw it. So he turned to the streets, seeking opportunities to obtain fast cash. Inspired by the Wild West outlaws he'd read about in dime novels, short-form paper stories popular in the early 20th century, Adelard started stealing horses from delivery wagons in Kilgubbin. He'd hide the stolen horses in abandoned buildings until the owners paid a ransom, and it proved to earn Adelard that quick cash he was after. Some of his new Kilgubbin friends mocked him, calling him Jesse James or Little Horsenapper, but he saw it as a temporary solution to curb his hunger and to keep a roof over his head. Hell, it's a living till something better comes along, he told them. The horse napping operation was risky work for Adelard as Kilgubbin had a dark and ruthless reputation. Most parts of the neighbourhood were notorious for violence, with one intersection near where young Adelard had made camp at the corner of Oak and Milton known as Death Corner. This was because of the amount of stabbed or shot up bodies that turned up in and around the shadowy saloons and whorehouses located there. This shady atmosphere meant that Kilgubbin was a breeding ground for gangs of young toughs, many still in their teens, who were drawn to a life of crime with the lack of honest work available and often found themselves in deadly confrontations with the police. Adelard quickly fell in with these young punks with a point to prove. Some of his closest companions, who would remain loyal throughout his life, sang alongside him in the boys' choir at the Holy Name Cathedral, but then shed any ounce of innocence they displayed inside the church as soon as they took off their white robes after Sunday Mass. At the forefront of Kilgubbin's delinquent youth stood the charismatic Charles Dean O'Banion, known by his pals affectionately as Deanie. Despite a slight limp from a childhood streetcar accident, O'Banion was a fearless leader, brimming with confidence and charm. He possessed a silver tongue capable of persuading anyone, but wasn't afraid to resort to his trusty fists when words failed, gaining a reputation as a strong and ruthless street fighter. Under O'Banion's influence, Adelard abandoned his horse-thieving ways and embraced a wider array of criminal activities. He idolised the older, streetwise O'Banion, following him through a nightly routine of pickpocketing, shoplifting, burglary, and eventually armed robbery and safecracking. O'Banion's fast-buck schemes and undeniable charisma attracted other ambitious youths. Amongst them was Earl Wojciechowski, a skinny Polish kid whose immigrant parents had shortened their unwieldy surname to Weiss. He became known simply as Jaime amongst the lads and was known for his serious and fearless personality. Another recruit to the crew was the short-tempered and irritable Italian Vincent Drucci, nicknamed the Schemer by Deanie for his knack of planning successful heists, netting the crew lucrative frequent scores with every robbery. And with that, they quickly gained a reputation as a successful and organised robbery gang, targeting shops and warehouses along the Chicago River, specialising in lifting furs, jewellery and anything else that could net them a pretty penny in Chicago's black market. No locked shutter or barred window could deter O'Banion's crew from their relentless spree of thefts. However, their luck ran out in 1912 when they attempted to rob a warehouse that was known to be storing some luxurious and expensive furs, and the crew planned to relieve the warehouse of said goods. Night watchmen foiled their plan, and while the rest of the Kilgubbin lads escaped, 19-year-old Adelard was caught and this is when he first adopted the name of George Moran, as that was the first name he thought of when police nabbed him. He was sent to the infamous Joliet State Prison south of Chicago to serve a 2-year sentence. This arrest marked a turning point, cementing his identity as George Moran and sent him on a path that would lead to further notoriety in Chicago's underworld. The cold, harsh reality of Joliet State Prison, the grim walls, the filthy cells, the monotonous labour, the inedible food and the brutal guards only fueled Moran's longing for freedom. When that day finally arrived after 2 years inside in 1914, he returned to kill Gubbin not as a disgraced convict, but as a hero. He was the one who had been up the river and survived. More importantly, as O'Banion proudly proclaimed, Moran had kept his mouth shut during police interrogations, refusing to betray his comrades. "Loyalty, lads," O'Banion declared, "is the sign of a good egg, a trusting egg. Moran is aces with me." Despite their criminal activities, loyalty formed the bedrock of what would soon to become known as the Northside Irish Gang, even with the presence of the Polish Weiss and Italian Drucci in their ranks. Moran eagerly rejoined his old crew, excited to catch up on the action he'd missed. The gang had evolved during his absence. They were no longer petty thieves snatching small change from cash registers or swiping produce from alleyways. Now they targeted high-valued goods like tuxedos and jewels from downtown stores, selling them through mob connections or cracking safes for a bigger payday. These daring escapades were not without their mishaps, however. During one safe-cracking attempt, Moran, still learning the ropes, used too much dynamite, blowing a hole in the wall but leaving the safe intact. The gang escaped unscathed, laughing at their near miss. When not engaged in robberies, they earned extra cash as enforcers for the Herald-Examiner newspaper, intimidating and even resorting to violence against newsstand owners selling the rival Chicago Tribune. Moran's temper was his defining characteristic. Unlike O'Banion, who masked his anger with a smile, or Weiss and Drucci, who were learning to control their outbursts, Moran was a powder keg. He didn't simmer, he exploded. This volatility earned him the nickname Bugs, a moniker he initially despised. But he soon realised that even the toughest thugs gave him a wide berth when they heard that name. Bugs Moran became a badge of fear and respect, and he embraced it. On weekends, the gang gravitated towards the dimly lit, smoke-filled McGovern's Saloon, located at 661 North Clark Street. Here, O'Banion moonlighted as a singing waiter, serenading patrons with Irish ballads in his smooth tenor voice. Whilst Dini entertained the crowd, Moran, Weiss and Drucci worked the room, picking pockets and relieving drunken patrons of their wallets in the dimly lit lavatory and shaking down jackets in the cloakroom. McGovern's was a haven for colourful characters, and the lads expanded its network, joining a local gang called the Market Street Boys and befriending fellow outlaws like Sammy Nails Morton, a car thief and fence, Louis Two-Gun Altery, a union buster with a Wild West obsession, and dapper Dan McCarthy, an army deserter turned plumber with a penchant for fine cars and murder. But McGovern's wasn't just a den of sin. For the gang, it also served as an unlikely stepping stone to greater influence. McGovern's attracted a clientele of powerful politicians and union bosses, mostly Irishmen who enjoyed O'Banion's charm and Moran's rough and tumble spirit. They saw these young pirates, as they called them, as a refreshing change from their own buttoned-up world. O'Banion, ever the opportunist, seized the chance to elevate their status. With his quick wit and persuasive skills, he convinced these influential figures that he and his Kilgubbin lads could be useful. They could handle labour disputes, intimidate rivals and even sway elections. We're a diverse lot, Dini would grin, and we wear our brass knuckles with style, sir." The judges, aldermen and captains of industry were intrigued. They resided in the affluent Lincoln Park neighbourhood, a politically and economically vital area along Lake Michigan. Protecting their power and prestige was paramount, and they weren't afraid to employ unsavoury tactics to do so. O'Banion, Bugs and the Kilgubbin lads became their go-to muscle. The O'Banion gang's political influence was a double-edged sword, however. It granted them a certain level of immunity, a get-out-of-jail-free card that they wielded with impunity. But it also tied them to a system riddled with corruption and deceit, a dangerous game where the stakes were constantly rising. Moran, emboldened by their newfound power, pushed the boundaries further with each daring heist, believing that he was now untouchable. When Bugs was once again arrested on suspicion of robbery when the Kilgubbin lads were pulling off another daring safe-cracking job, a judge let him off after a mild brushing. Police found Moran and Drucci's prints on the dial of a safe at the Parkview team room, which they had successfully cracked and made off with the cash. A jury bribed by O'Banion quickly acquitted Moran and Drucci, and when walking from court, O'Banion jerked a thumb at Weiss and side-mouthed to the reporters, "It was an oversight. Jaime was supposed to wipe the prints off, and he forgot." The remark drew a belly laugh from all the reporters outside the court, and the article made the front pages, further elevating the Kilgubbin crew's notoriety in the Chicago underworld. O'Banion had managed to grease the palms in this incident, however Moran's brazenness would prove to be his downfall. The 1917 armed robbery attempt in a Loop department store was a spectacle. Moran was caught red-handed holding up a store in broad daylight with Weiss, and with the store owner not backing down and opening the safe for the duo, the pair were nicked by police. This public display of defiance was one that even their political connections couldn't erase. The police, under pressure to clean up their image, made an example of Bugs, who became a symbol of the rampant lawlessness that plagued the city, his mugshot plastered onto the front pages of Chicago papers as he was shipped off to Joliet State Prison for the second time in his life. Bugs's return to Joliet was a bitter pill to swallow. The camaraderie, the thrill of the heists, the intoxicating taste of power was all replaced by the cold, stark, damp reality of prison life. It was a sobering reminder that even the most connected criminals, of which the Kilgubbin lads were quickly becoming, were not immune to the long arm of the law. O'Banion was allowed to visit Bugs in prison shortly after his sentence started, and it was a bittersweet reunion. On one hand, it reinforced the bond of loyalty that held their gang together, but on the other hand, it highlighted the fragility of their criminal enterprise. O'Banion's promise to elevate Moran to greater heights upon his release was both a comfort and an arm around a dejected Bugs, again the only Kilgubbin lad behind bars. "We'll ride to the top together, lad. I'll see to it," Deeney said. "No more prison rags for you." These words of encouragement from his idolised leader fueled Bugs' determination to not only survive his sentence, but to emerge stronger and more ambitious than ever, and Deeney kept that promise. As Bugs served his time, the world outside continued to change. Prohibition was looming on the horizon, promising a new era of opportunity for those willing to exploit it. The seeds of a future empire were planted by Deeney as Moran languished in his cell. He knew that when he finally walked free, he would be ready to claim his place at the top of the Northsiders alongside his loyal friend and mentor, O'Banion. After 6 years inside, Bugs Moran emerged from Joliet in February 1923 and stepped into a Chicago transformed. Prohibition, enacted 3 years earlier, had turned the city into a battleground for control of the lucrative illegal liquor trade. The old rules no longer applied. Bugs, once a petty thief, now found himself welcomed back into the fold with open arms. His past conviction, a mark of shame in the old world, was now a badge of honour in this new reality. Deanie O'Banion, his mentor and leader of the Northsiders, had capitalised on Prohibition's chaos. The gang controlled breweries, distilleries and speakeasies, raking in unimaginable profits. Bugs, as O'Banion's right-hand man, was now a force to be reckoned with. Judges and police who once did favours out of obligation now did so out of fear. The North Side was theirs, and Moran was entitled to his share of the spoils. The 18th Amendment, as Prohibition was also known, was intended to curb alcohol consumption, but it had instead unleashed a monstrous criminal enterprise. Americans' thirst for liquor hadn't diminished, and the underworld was more than happy to quench it. Bootleggers became folk heroes, supplying the forbidden fruit and amassing fortunes in the process. Across the nation, organised crime syndicates flourished. In New York, figures like Arnold Rothstein and Lucky Luciano thrived under the protection of a corrupt political machine. Chicago, meanwhile, was divided between Deanie O'Banion's Northsiders and Johnny Torrio's Southside outfit, both operating with the greased approval of the notoriously corrupt mayor, Big Bill Thompson. Law enforcement was overwhelmed, outgunned and often complicit. Speakeasies disguised as legitimate businesses, clandestine breweries and distilleries, and fleets of camouflaged vehicles transporting booze, the whole system operated in plain sight, fueled by the insatiable demand for alcohol. Prohibition had inadvertently created a golden age for organised crime, setting the stage for the violent gang wars that would define the era. Bugs, fresh out of prison and eager to prove himself, was about to step into this volatile landscape, ready to stake his claim in the flourishing bootlegging empire. Bugs came back home to a Kilgubbin also completely transformed. The once chaotic neighbourhood was now firmly under the control of the Northsiders. Their influence stretched far beyond Kilgubbin's borders, encompassing Lincoln Park, the Gold Coast, and even reaching into the suburbs. Through their ever-growing payroll, they held sway over cops, judges, businessmen, and every vote within their territory. The speakeasies, the private parties, the weddings and celebrations, not a drop of alcohol flowed without a cut going to O'Banion and his crew. Their control was absolute, their profits immense. Bugs, Weiss, Drucci, Altery and McCarthy were all key players in this thriving enterprise, taking orders, managing distribution and ensuring customer loyalty. If anyone dared to cross the Northsiders, the Gusenberg brothers, Frank and Pete, were always ready to enforce compliance. These hardened street fighters, with their menacing scowls and reputations for brutality, were the muscle behind the operation. Nails Morton, meanwhile, handled the logistics, ensuring the smooth delivery of their precious beer and whiskey kept flowing swiftly down thirsty Chicagoan throats. The gang's headquarters was located above Schofield's flower shop on North State Street. O'Banion, a surprisingly passionate florist, was a part owner, and the shop provided a seemingly innocuous front for their criminal activities. From this base, Bugs and his fellow lieutenants orchestrated their operations, maintaining a tight grip on the north side. Schofield's was also located directly across the street from the Holy Name Cathedral, where the lads attended mass at 10:30 AM daily and could be known to rub out an encroaching 2-bit bootlegger an hour after it finished at 12 PM. While the gang thrived internally, external pressures were mounting. The South Side, under the leadership of Johnny Torrio and his rising star, Al Capone, was expanding its territory and influence. This growing rivalry would soon erupt into a full-fledged gang war, testing the loyalty and resolve of the Northside gang and pushing Bugs to the forefront of a bloody conflict that would rock Chicago's underworld. Johnny Torrio, a seemingly mild-mannered man with a paternal air about him, possessed the cunning ambition to transform Chicago's South Side into a well-oiled criminal machine. A veteran of New York's underworld, Torrio brought a business-like approach to his operations, seeking to implement his approach to minimise bloodshed and maximise profits in Chicago. Initially, O'Banion didn't object to Torrio's self-appointed role as a mediator and peacekeeper amongst Chicago's gangs. In 1921, Torrio convened a meeting of all the major gang leaders, including O'Banion, to establish territorial boundaries and foster cooperation. This division of the city included key players like Torrio and his protege Al Capone controlling the Loop and most of the South Side, along with numerous suburbs. Dini held the North Side, the Jenner brothers and Diamond Joe Esposito ruled Little Italy, southwest of the Loop. Edward Spike O'Donnell controlled the far south side, William Klondike O'Donnell managed the far west side, Terry Drugan and Frankie Lake held the near west side, Joe Soltis and Frankie McCurlane operated in the Stockyards area, and Roger Towie governed the far suburbs. However, this uneasy peace was short-lived. Driven by greed and ambition, some gangs began encroaching on others' territories. The Northsiders observed a disturbing pattern. Whenever a smaller gang was absorbed, Torrio-backed gunmen were always involved. The Southside gangs were consolidating under Torrio's banner, and O'Banion, who harboured a deep distrust of them damn Sicilians as he called them, grew increasingly wary. He publicly accused Torrio of undermining his own peace initiative and seeking to dominate the entire city. The lines were drawn and the tension between the North and the South sides escalated, setting the stage for a brutal conflict that would test the limits of loyalty and reshape Chicago's underworld forever. As the months passed, the rivalry between the two factions intensified. O'Banion and his crew delighted in publicly mocking Capone, labelling him Scarface due to a facial scar he picked up in a barroom fight, and the Behemoth due to his podgy frame. Torrio, ever the diplomat, tried to maintain peace, but the escalating tensions and O'Banion's personal insults eventually wore him down. Combining the public humiliation with a series of events orchestrated by Dini pushed Torrio to the breaking point, convincing him that Al Capone was right and O'Banion had to be eliminated. First, there was the Cicero speakeasy dispute. Torrio had agreed to share some of his spoils from his Cicero operations with O'Banion in exchange for a stake in the lucrative Cybin Brewery on North Larrabee Street. But O'Banion, feeling shortchanged, cleverly relocated several of his speakeasies to Cicero, raking in far more profits than initially agreed upon. Torrio's offer to compensate with a share of his brothel income was met with a scornful refusal from O'Banion, who cited his Catholic faith as the reason to avoid the stinking business of prostitution, just as Bugs did. Next, there was the Jenner brothers' transgression. These 6 Sicilian bootlegging brothers from the Loop, allied with Torrio, had violated territorial agreements by selling their low-quality alcohol in the North Side and thus the Northsiders' territory. O'Banion sought Torrio's intervention, but Torrio refused to take action, dismissing Dini's frustrations. O'Banion, feeling betrayed, retaliated by demanding that Angelo Jenner, one of the brothers, pay a $30,000 gambling debt to a casino called The Ship, a Southside casino O'Banion had a stake in. Torrio wanted to forgive the debt, but O'Banion was adamant. "To hell with those Sicilians," he exclaimed, giving Angelo a week to pay up, or else. Finally came the notorious brewery raid. O'Banion announced his retirement from the rackets and offered to sell his half of the Cybin brewery to Torrio for a hefty sum. Torrio, eager to expand his holdings, agreed. However, during their tour of the brewery, the police raided the place. Torrio, with a prior liquor-related arrest, was eventually sentenced to 9 months in jail, whilst O'Banion, a first-time offender, got away with a mere fine. Torrio later discovered that the raid had been orchestrated by O'Banion and knew that his Northsiders couldn't take on the huge army of the Southside, so therefore decided to try and put Torrio behind bars. These 3 incidents, combined with O'Banion's constant taunts and disrespect, convinced Torrio that the Northside leader had become too much of a liability. The decision was made. O'Banion had to go. On the morning of November the 10th, 1924, whilst Deany was clipping chrysanthemums in the back room of Schofield's flower shop, Frankie Yale, a notorious New York gunman, entered the shop accompanied by John Scalise and Albert Anselmi, 2 of Al Capone's most ruthless enforcers. As O'Banion extended his hand in greeting, not knowing Frankie Yale was a hitman for the Southsiders as he wasn't from Chicago, Yale seized it in a vice-like grip, a gesture of false camaraderie that masked the impending betrayal. In that fleeting moment of vulnerability, Scalise and Anselmi drew their weapons and unleashed a volley of bullets, tearing into O'Banion's chest and throat. The force of the impact sent him sprawling to the floor, his blood staining the delicate flowers he had been tending to moments earlier. As O'Banion lay dying face down on the cold concrete, one of the assassins delivered a final, merciless shot to the back of his head, a chilling coup de grace that silenced the once powerful Northside leader forever. The echoes of the gunshots reverberated through the streets of Chicago, and within minutes the flower shop, a symbol of O'Banion's legitimate business and his love of beauty, was now surrounded by morbidly curious onlookers who wanted to see the body of the slain mobster. The assassination of Deany sent shockwaves throughout the Northside gang. Bugs, in particular, was devastated by the loss of his friend and mentor. The brutal slaying carried out in broad daylight within the seemingly safe haven of Schofield's flower shop shattered the illusion of invincibility that had enveloped the gang. It was a stark reminder that even in their position of power, they were not immune to the cold, calculated violence that permeated throughout Chicago's underworld. The remaining Northside leaders, Bugs Moran, Jaime Weiss and Vincent Drucci, faced a critical juncture. They could succumb to fear and fragmentation, or they could rise to the challenge and solidify their control over the Northside. In a display of defiance and ambition, they chose the latter. They launched an audacious newspaper advertisement announcing the formation of a board of governors, which was a calculated move, both a show of unity and a veiled threat to the Southsiders. It was a declaration that they would not be cowed by violence, that they would be ready to fight for their territory and avenge their fallen leader. The Torrio Capone faction recognised the message loud and clear. The Northsiders were not going to go quietly in the night. They were prepared to wage war, and they had specific targets in mind. They found out that Frankie Yale, the notorious New York gunman, had been spotted around Chicago around the time of O'Banion's murder. Whispers in the underworld suggested that 2 of Capone's most ruthless enforcers, Alberto Anselmi and John Scalise, were also involved, which they were, and this began to filter through to the crew. Now knowing who was behind the hit on their boss Deany, the Northsiders were hellbent on making O'Banion's assassins pay for their sins, no matter the cost. Chicago braced itself for the impending violence. The fragile peace that Torrio had brokered was shattered, and the streets of the city were poised to become a battleground once more. The Northsiders, fueled by grief, anger and a thirst for revenge, were ready to unleash their fury upon the Southsiders. The ensuing conflict would be brutal, bloody and unforgiving, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. The legacy of Deanie O'Banion would be written in blood, and the fate of Chicago's underworld would hang in the balance. The Northsiders, reeling from O'Banion's murder, retaliated quickly with a vengeance. Their first target was none other than Al Capone himself. On a freezing January evening in 1925, a black sedan carrying Capone and his associates pulled up outside Palermo's restaurant on West 63rd Street. As they stepped out the vehicle, a dark green touring car lurking in the shadows unleashed a torrent of bullets from 3 machine guns wielded by Jaime, Bugs and Drucci. Capone and his men dove for cover, the air thick with the deafening rattle of gunfire. Metal pinged, glass shattered, and the once sleek sedan was reduced to a mangled wreck, perforated by over 50 bullet holes. Miraculously, Capone survived, though his chauffeur suffered a minor wound. The attackers vanished into the snowy night, leaving behind a scene of chaos and a shaken but determined Capone. From that moment on, Al Capone became a virtual recluse, constantly surrounded by a sea of bodyguards and travelling only in custom-built, bulletproof limousines. The Northsiders had made their mark, instilling a sense of fear and paranoia in their rival that would haunt him for years to come. Johnny Torrio, however, remained defiant. Despite Capone's pleas, he refused the protection of bodyguards, preferring the freedom of movement and deeming them a hindrance. But his confidence proved to be too brazen. 12 days after the attack on Capone, Torrio and his wife, Anna, were ambushed outside their home after a shopping trip. As Anna carried groceries inside, Torrio lingered by the car, assisting the chauffeur. Neither man noticed the 3 figures lurking in a grey sedan across the street. Suddenly, car doors slammed and Jaime Weiss and Bugs Moran emerged, weapons at the ready. Weiss fired his shotgun, wounding the chauffeur. Another blast shattered the limo's windows, showering Torrio with glass shards. He bolted for the safety of his house, but another shot rang out and a searing pain ripped through his cheek. Stumbling and disorientated, he collapsed onto the sidewalk, blood gushing from his face. Through blurred vision, Torrio saw Bugs looming over him, the cold steel of a pistol pressed against his temple. "Coup de grace," Bugs said, compliments of Deanie. Torrio braced himself for the final blow, but the gun clicked harmlessly. Bugs, cursing, frantically tried to clear the jam, but the weapon refused to fire. Drucci, behind the wheel of the getaway car, grew impatient. The commotion had attracted attention. Neighbours peered from windows and passing cars slowed to gawk. Time was running out. "Come on, let's scram," Drucci yelled, his voice echoing Weiss's urgent pleas to Bugs. Bugs, reluctantly abandoning his mission, retreated to the car. They sped away, leaving Torrio bleeding and unconscious on the sidewalk. Though they had failed to kill him, the message was clear. The Northsiders meant business, and their thirst for revenge was far from quenched. Though Torrio had miraculously survived the attempt on his life, the experience left him deeply shaken. The physical wounds would heal, but the psychological scars ran far deeper. The relentless violence, the constant fear for his life, the burden of leadership in a world spiralling into chaos, it all weighed heavily on him. He realised that the relentless pursuit of power came at a devastating cost, and he was no longer willing to pay it and scrambled to Naples for a few weeks to escape the heat of the Windy City. The heat grew, and news of the escalating violence in Chicago reached Torrio even in his self-imposed exile. The Northsiders, driven by a burning desire for vengeance, were systematically dismantling the Jenner brothers' Operation Southsider Allies. Angelo Jenner, the first to fall, was ambushed and gunned down in his car as he drove past Lincoln Park by Bugs and Jaime. His brothers, Mike and Tony, soon followed, their lives cut short in a hail of bullets after they were double-crossed by a Northsider loyalist. The violence didn't stop there. Giuseppe the Cavalier Nerone, a close associate of the Jenners, and Sam Samatuna, a powerful figure in the Unione Siciliane, were also brutally murdered by the Northsiders. Bugs, Jaime and Vincent Drucci had sent a clear message. They would stop at nothing to avenge O'Banion's death and protect their territory. The streets of Chicago were stained with blood, and the city's reputation as a haven for lawlessness grew with each passing day. Torrio, witnessing the carnage from afar, recognised the futility of further resistance. The Northsiders were relentless, their thirst for blood insatiable, and, with a heavy heart, Torrio made the difficult decision to step back from the fray. He transferred his vast criminal empire to his protege, Al Capone, a man he believed possessed the ruthlessness and ambition to navigate the treacherous waters of Chicago's underworld. Torrio and his wife Anna quietly slipped away, seeking refuge in the familiar embrace of Italy, leaving behind a city teetering on the edge of anarchy. Capone, though grieving the loss of his mentor as Torrio sailed off to Italy, was also exhilarated by the opportunity to prove himself. He had long remained leashed under Torrio's cautious and peaceful approach, and now, with the reins of power firmly in his grasp, he was ready to unleash his full fury upon the Northsiders. The gang war intensified, plunging Chicago into a dark and bloody era. The North and South sides clashed in a relentless cycle of violence, each act of aggression met with swift and brutal retaliation. The city became a battleground, its streets echoing with the sound of gunfire and the screams of the dying. Bugs and the Northsiders, driven by a potent cocktail of grief, rage and ambition, fought tooth and nail to protect their territory and avenge their fallen leader. Capone, equally determined to consolidate his power and crush his rivals, responded with a calculated ruthlessness that would soon earn him the reputation that he still holds strong today. The Jenner brothers' demise ignited a fierce backlash from Capone's forces, who were aligned with the brothers. 5 days after the hit on Angelo Jenner, Bugs and Drucci found themselves in the crosshairs as Capone's gunmen unleashed a torrent of machine gun fire on their car as they cruised down North State Street, the same road that McGovern's was located on and deep in the heart of Northside territory. Drucci, ever the quick thinker, swerved to evade the onslaught, but the manoeuvre sent the vehicle flying over a curb and crashing into a building. Wounded but defiant, Moran and Drucci abandoned the wrecked car and sought refuge in a nearby doorway. There, they returned fire, their pistols blazing as they retreated through the building and out onto another street. The chase from the Southsiders continued for 3 blocks until the two, bloodied but unscathed, stumbled into a doctor's office and Al Capone's men retreated with the sound of the police nearby. Their injuries were patched up and they were soon back on the streets, ready to continue the fight. This ambush marked the beginning of a relentless campaign by Capone to assert his dominance, wipe out the Northsiders and avenge the Jenners. In 1926, he targeted Weiss and Drucci again, sending his ambitious Sicilian bodyguard, Louis Barco, to carry out the hits. The chosen battleground was Michigan Avenue, a bustling thoroughfare teeming with unsuspecting civilians. The first attempt unfolded on a busy August afternoon. Weiss and Drucci were en route to deliver a payoff to political boss Morris Eller when Barco's car pulled up alongside them, unleashing a hail of bullets from his submachine gun. The air crackled with gunfire and terrified bystanders jumped for cover as the Northsiders scrambled for safety behind parked cars. Miraculously, no one was hurt, but the brazen attack in broad daylight enraged the police and further fueled the flames of the gang war. Just 4 days later, the same scene played out again at pretty much the same spot as the Northsiders cruised across Michigan Avenue Bridge. This time, however, Jaime and Drucci were well prepared. They drew their revolvers and returned fire at Barco and 2 Southside hitmen when they targeted the Northsiders' route, transforming Michigan Avenue into a chaotic battlefield. Cars swerved to avoid the crossfire and Drucci, dodging bullets, closed in on Barco's vehicle. Barco's driver panicked, veering onto the sidewalk and sending the Southsiders tumbling onto the pavement. Drucci, injured in the fall but still defiant, pursued the fleeing attackers, firing his pistol as they retreated back across Michigan Avenue Bridge. By the time police arrived, the scene was pandemonium. Drucci, ever the quick-witted survivor, claimed he was merely chasing after thieves who had tried to steal his wallet. The police, overwhelmed and outmaneuvered, could do little more than charge him with disturbing the peace. These audacious attacks on Michigan Avenue showcased the Northsiders' resilience and their willingness to fight back against Capone's aggression. They were not intimidated and they were determined to protect their territory at all costs. The gang war raged on, its intensity growing with each passing day. And it reached an absolute pinnacle in 1926 with an audacious attack that would become a symbol of the Roaring Twenties' reckless aggression. The target, once again, was Al Capone himself, and the stage was set in Cicero, a suburb west of Chicago where Capone had established his headquarters after a temporary political shift in the city. Capone, now operating from the Hawthorne Hotel, had turned Cicero into his own personal kingdom, conducting business as usual, away from the prying eyes of Chicago's newly reform-minded mayor. But his sanctuary was about to be shattered. On a seemingly ordinary afternoon, a convoy of 6 cars, their windows obscured by curtains, rolled slowly down 22nd Street in Cicero. The only visible clue to their deadly intent were the barrels of Tommy guns protruding from the windows. The lead car, equipped with a police siren, also added to the deception. As the convoy reached the Hawthorne Hotel, chaos erupted. A deafening barrage of gunfire ripped through the air, targeting Capone's favourite haunts, the barbershop where he got his daily shave, a nearby delicatessen, a laundry and the Hawthorne restaurant itself. In a final dramatic act, a gunman dressed in overalls emerged from one of the cars and unleashed a torrent of bullets into the hotel lobby, his machine gun spraying lead like a fire hose whilst he uncontrollably grinned at the thought of his bullets ripping through the flesh of Al Capone. The man in overalls was Jaime Weiss, still hellbent on avenging his boss, mentor and best friend, Deanie O'Banion. The image of Jaime smiling and longing for the blood of the boss of the Southsiders was ingrained into Capone's mind, and his stomach churned at the thought of his name, which led Jaime to be known as the only man that Al Capone ever feared. After emptying the entire 100-round extended drum of the Tommy gun into the Hawthorne, Weiss hopped back into the waiting sedan and made off to Schofield's flower shop. The attack was over in minutes, leaving behind a scene of devastation. Over 1,000 shots had been fired in total, yet Capone, miraculously, had once again survived. His bodyguard, Frankie Rio, had reacted instantly, pulling him to the floor just as the bullets started flying. They emerged from the ordeal covered in coffee, broken glass and splintered wood, but luckily for the Southsiders, they were still alive. The Cicero Massacre, as the press dubbed it, sent shockwaves through the city. It was a brazen display of power, a testament to the Northsiders' audacity and their willingness to risk everything in their quest for revenge, and a level of violence that the city had never seen before, even if no one died. Capone, though shaken, recognised the message. The Northsiders were not going to back down. The sheer scale of the attack forced Capone to reconsider his strategy. He knew that further bloodshed would only lead to more casualties and instability. Reluctantly, he extended an offer of truce to the Northsiders. A peace meeting was hastily arranged at the Hotel Sherman in downtown Chicago. Capone, represented by Tony Lombardo, the head of the Unione Siciliane, met with Jaime Weiss, acting on behalf of the Northside gang. Weiss's demands were simple: peace in exchange for the heads of Scalise and Anselmi, the two hitmen believed to have killed O'Banion. Lombardo then called Capone and regurgitated Weiss's demands. Capone scoffed at the proposal and said he'd never turn one of his own in. "Why, I wouldn't do that to a dog," Capone tells Lombardo on the phone. Weiss then angrily stormed out of the hotel and declared that peace will not end, leaving Capone without a choice. Al Capone decides at that moment that Weiss must be killed. He knows that his hot-headed and furious Northside rival will try to kill Capone again. It's now a case of kill or be killed. Just 1 week after the Cicero massacre, tragedy struck the Northsiders once again. Jaime Weiss, one of the trio of fearsome mobsters now leading the gang since O'Banion's death, was brutally gunned down in broad daylight. On the morning of October the 11th, 1926, Weiss had attended court proceedings for Joe Soltis, a Southside gangster facing murder charges. It was later revealed that Weiss and Moran were orchestrating Soltis' acquittal, hoping to gain an ally against Capone. As court adjourned, Weiss, accompanied by his entourage, Soltis' attorney, an alderman and 2 bodyguards, headed back to their headquarters above Schofield's flower shop. Parking across the street, they strolled towards the shop, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. Suddenly, a hail of bullets erupted from a second-story window in the adjacent building. The gunmen, Sam Golfbag Hunt and machine gun Jack McGurn, armed with Thompson submachine guns, had a clear view of their targets. Jaime was hit with a devastating combination of shotgun pellets and machine gun bullets from 2 different angles, his body absorbing a total of 10 impacts. He collapsed onto the unforgiving pavement in front of Schofield's flower shop, his life extinguished in an instant. His loyal associate and bodyguard, Patrick Murray, was also caught in the crossfire, hit 7 times, and also dying where he fell. In a chilling display of brutality, the Capone gunmen continued to fire even after their targets were down, ensuring that Weiss, like his fallen leader O'Banion, was undeniably dead. With their mission complete, Golfbag and Machine Gun Jack made their escape through the back of the apartment they had strategically rented for the hit. Their Tommy guns, still warm from the carnage, were discarded into a neighbouring backyard, silent witnesses to the cold-blooded execution. This attack was a shocking display of audacity and ruthlessness. The Southsiders had not only targeted Weiss in the heart of his own territory, but had also damaged the facade of the Holy Name Cathedral, leaving its cornerstone scarred and its inscription partially obliterated. The news of Weiss's death sent a chill through the Northside gang and absolutely decimated Bugs and Drucci, who were now the sole leaders, their ranks thinning with each passing day as Capone continued his aggressive attack to wipe out the Northsiders. The once invincible lads of Kilgubbin were falling one by one, their dreams of dominance shattered by the relentless violence of the gang war. The future seemed bleak, and the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on their shoulders. They knew they had to respond, to avenge their fallen comrades and to protect what remained of their territory, but the odds were stacked against them. The South Side, under Capone's iron fist, was growing stronger, and the streets of Chicago were stained with the blood of their friends and their allies. The war was far from over, and its outcome was uncertain. When asked by the press his thoughts on the gang war which was decimating the Northsiders, Bugs told the press that only Al Capone kills like that. Could Bugs and Drucci lead another aggressive attack, further spilling more blood on the streets of Chicago, or would they negotiate peace? Here, the first half of Bugs Moran's incredible 50-year criminal career reaches a pivotal moment, and the second half will be covered in part 2. Thanks so much for watching. Please like the video and consider subscribing if you enjoyed. And remember, you can get early access to part 2 without adverts, plus every other video early and ad-free I release by becoming a member of our Patreon, where you'll also receive added extras and membership to our community. So please do consider becoming a member if you can. But in the meantime, once again, thanks so much for watching and for all your support, and I'll see you in part 2.